Hello everyone, my name is Kenny Ortega. I am the owner of RoadRunner Driver's Education. We are based out of Albuquerque, New Mexico. If you are a paying customer or someone who wants to learn about driver's education through our YouTube channel, we hope that you are able to find this information extremely useful to become a better operator of a motor vehicle. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, so click the links to find us. We begin each chapter with knowledge objectives and attitude objectives. The information you receive might be very long, but it's crucial information that can help you become a safe driver, and we all know we can use more of those on our streets today. So we're going to start off our driver's education journey with chapter number 1, which is titled Managing Risk When Driving. So as I mentioned before, we start every single chapter with a list of knowledge objectives. So for chapter 1, by the end of chapter 1, students will be able to explain the freedoms and responsibilities that accompany a driver's license, describe the crash and fatality risks of new drivers, describe common errors committed by new drivers, explain how a driver's perception of his or her driving ability can influence crash involvement, explain how knowledge and awareness of risk can influence a driver's behavior, describe how better management of visibility, time, and space can lower your risk when driving. Identify and discuss the characteristics of risk. Identify the 3 stages of the graduated driver's licensing program. Identify the role of parents and mentors in achieving the objectives of the graduated driver's licensing program. And explain the purpose and content of a parent-teen driving agreement. And then we have our attitude objectives. By the end of chapter number 1, students will accept that traffic fatalities are the leading cause of death for persons between the ages of 4 and 34 years of age. On average, it takes 5 years to become as proficient as the typical driver. Drivers tend to underestimate the level of risk associated with driving. Drivers in general, and new drivers particularly, tend to overrate their ability to respond properly to a driving emergency. And the active involvement of parents and mentors during the learning process substantially reduces the new driver's chance of being injured or killed in a crash. Which leads us to our first slide for chapter number 1. And we have some questions that we will answer as we go through chapter number 1. Some of these questions might be, what does a driver's license mean today? How important is it to you now? How important is it to drivers of any age? And for what other purposes can a driver's license be used? So what does it mean to have a driver's license to drive? It means freedom, it means choices and opportunities, but with these opportunities come responsibility. Driving safely is a complex and oftentimes demanding task. Drivers have to monitor traffic and traffic control devices, observe and anticipate the actions of other drivers, pedestrians, and cyclists, know and comply with traffic regulations, search for and obtain information from frequently changing environments, and assess the consequences of alternative responses. Driving safely also requires good habits. A skillful, experienced driver performs these steps as a matter of habit, minimizing the need for corrective action. Fortunately, not all driving is done under conditions that require advanced driving skills or a constant, intense level of attention. Driving also requires additional demands. Increased speed, dense traffic, poor weather, distractions, stress and fatigue can all place additional demands on a driver. Any of these factors can lead to mistakes and situations for which the driver is not prepared or is incapable of handling, thus increasing the chance of a crash. Now let's talk about driving experience and risk. The first thing you need to know is experience doesn't happen overnight. Completing a driver education course and obtaining a driver's license does not mean a driver will drive safely. A license indicates only that the individual has demonstrated basic knowledge and the ability needed to control a motor vehicle. It takes a new driver about 5 years to develop the driving ability demonstrated by the average driver on the road. Nearly half of all new drivers will either be charged with a traffic offense or be involved in a collision during their first 12 months of driving. Nationally, more than 3,500 teenagers die in a motor vehicle crash each year. Per miles driven, novice drivers have a crash rate 4 times higher than experienced drivers. 16-year-old drivers have the highest fatality rate. An in-depth review of 2,000 crashes involving 16 and 18-year-old drivers showed that 16-year-olds had a crash rate 2.6 times higher than that of 18-year-olds. It is estimated that approximately 25% of collisions involve some form of driver distraction. So the following is a list of primary crash factors. 20.8% did not pay adequate attention to the path of travel. 13.7% drove 5 or more miles per hour too fast for conditions. 6.6% tried to drive through a curve at too high a speed. 6.3% performed inadequate searches at intersections and pulled in front of cross traffic. 6.1% did not pay adequate attention at intersections and were struck by other vehicles. 5.6% used improper evasive actions or too much or too little steering for their vehicle's speed and capabilities. 3.9% failed to maintain a sufficient visual lead. Another 3.9% failed to see action developing at the side of the roadway. And another 3.9% were following vehicles too closely. And finally, 3.3% failed to yield the right-of-way. So the next question is, what is risk? Risk is the chance of injury, damage, or loss associated with a driving situation. A lack of awareness or ability to assess traffic or roadway conditions too frequently results in a late, inappropriate, or total lack of response from the driver. Then we have the odds. Few drivers are aware that up to 1 out of every 10 vehicles is involved in a crash each year. More than 30% of drivers believe that the odds of being involved in a crash are less than 1 in 1,000. Then we have overestimating your ability. About 85% of all drivers rate themselves as better than average with a lot of control or almost total control over their vehicles. More than 90% of drivers insist that if they were to be involved in a crash, the crash would be due to someone else's driving error. Driver error causes more than 90% of traffic crashes. Then we have guidelines. There are guidelines that can help drivers assess risk more accurately and determine an appropriate response. Consider the chance or possibility of a dangerous situation developing. Identify possible alternative actions and consider the consequences of each of those actions. And prepare to change your speed or change direction to manage or control the situation. Moving on to risk prevalence. To manage risk when driving, it is essential that the driver be alert to conditions and objects that could affect the level of risk. To manage risk, you must be aware of the 4 characteristics of risk. Number 1, risk is always present. Number 2, risk is affected by all road users. Number 3, perceived risk differs from actual risk. And number 4, risk can be managed. So let's start off with assessing risk. More than 50% of all vehicle occupant fatalities occur in single vehicle crashes, mostly on relatively straight, rural stretches of roadway. Major factors. Situations that appear to be risk-free do in fact involve risk. Assumptions of low risk, lack of perceived threat, and reduced attention appear to be major factors that contribute to risk and consequences in many situations. Improper use of the brakes or inaccurate steering input can cause the vehicle to lose traction and strike a fixed object or to overturn. Then we have running off a straight roadway. This type of crash most frequently involves young drivers and drivers over the age of 65. In these cases, the driver runs off the road and fails to respond or responds incorrectly. Improper use of the brakes or inaccurate steering input can cause the vehicle to lose traction and strike a fixed object or to overturn. While such events involving young drivers usually occur after dark, those involving older drivers are more likely to occur between 1 and 5 p.m. Moving on to blocked vision. Blocked vision is the factor that should signal increased risk. Whenever a driver's ability to see is restricted, the driver must adjust speed, position, and visibility as appropriate rather than driving blindly into a dangerous situation. Then you need to enhance your visibility. To reduce risk, drive with your low beam headlights turned on at all times. This helps other drivers to see you. A vehicle with low beam headlights on or daytime running lights on during daylight hours is visible to oncoming vehicles at almost twice the distance as the same vehicle without headlights turned on. Next, we have other roadway users. Roadway users can increase or decrease risk for themselves and other road users. The actions of all roadway users, pedestrians, and bicyclists affect all other users on the road. And now we have risk can be managed. Avoid meeting the pedestrian at the same time you meet the oncoming car. By slowing down, you separate these two by time and distance, allowing you to address each separately, thus reducing your risk. Next, we have risk management techniques. First, what you want to do is make an aggressive visual search. And how do you do that? You want to search 20 to 30 seconds ahead along your intended path of travel for objects or conditions that could increase your level of risk. Being aware of the level of traction and identifying an alternate path of travel 12 to 15 seconds ahead of you could save your life. Then you want to make good decisions with the information that you have. Using the information gained through your visual search to manage risk is also critical, including predicting the actions of other highway users that could increase your level of risk, by assessing the consequences of alternative responses, and by determining the best course of action. Then you need to act on your decisions, making accurate and appropriate adjustments to speed and direction, communicating with other roadway users by using signals or any other forms of communication, and always leaving enough distance between your vehicle and the road user ahead of you. You never want to tailgate another vehicle. One of the reasons why you never want to tailgate another vehicle is because the closer you get to an object, the more steering input you will need to maneuver around it. And in high-speed traffic, you might not have enough time to make that maneuver. So moving on to our graduated driver licensing program and risk. So graduated driver licensing is an approach to ease new drivers into driving by providing practice and skill development under low-risk conditions. This process of incrementally increasing a new driver's privileges has been shown to reduce teen crashes, teen injuries, and teen deaths. So you might be asking yourself, how does GDL work? It helps beginning drivers by promoting the development of basic knowledge and skills. It provides structured learning over an extended period of time. It also allows novice drivers to gain the skills, experience, and judgment abilities needed to become safe drivers. So we have stage 1 of the GDL, the learner's permit. Nearly all GDL programs go through 3 licensing stages: a learner's permit, an intermediate, probationary, or provisional license, and an unrestricted full license. But let's begin with the learner's permit. This generally requires new teen drivers to hold a learner's permit for a period of 6 months to 1 year. Permit drivers typically must enroll in an approved driver's education program and practice basic driving skills under the supervision of a licensed instructor or adult licensed driver. The learner's permit allows you to drive only when accompanied by an adult licensed driver, and no other passenger can be in the front seats. Learner's permit holders must often remain free of moving violations and at-fault crashes for several months or more before moving to the next stage. Then we have stage 2, the intermediate license. The intermediate, probationary, or provisional licensed driver is generally allowed to drive unsupervised, but with restrictions designed to help reduce the level of risk and distractions. Most states restrict whether new drivers may transport young passengers. Many states require the driver to be free of moving violations and at-fault crashes for a number of months before being fully eligible for their full license. And finally, we have stage 3, the full license. This typically happens around age 17 or 18. and drivers must meet the requirements of the intermediate, probationary, or provisional license stage. Now we're moving on to supervised driving. How can parents be involved? For driver training to be effective, parents and teens must communicate with each other. What you want to do is adopt a parent-teen driving agreement. Review the agreement together periodically. Parents should be a good role model because behavior is learned. Consistent supervised practice driving conducted over an extended period of time can help new drivers build on the skills that they have learned. The most effective way to coach a teen driver is to synchronize the practice driving with the topics being taught in the Teens Driver Education Program. Helpful driving hints for the adult coach include choosing a route before each lesson, remaining calm and patient throughout each lesson, properly demonstrating maneuvers for the students, monitoring traffic in all directions while also monitoring the actions of the new driver, and using commentary driving. So now we move on to the final slide for chapter number 1, the Parent-Teen Driving Agreement. A parent-teen driving agreement is a written agreement between parents and their new driver to outline responsibilities and rules related to the teen's safe driving. They generally involve adopting restrictions appropriate for the family, such as avoiding high-risk driving situations during the initial months of solo driving. So that means no driving in adverse weather, congested traffic, or on unsupervised long trips. Also, limiting all nighttime driving and gradually allowing limited amounts as the new driver progresses. Prohibiting the use of alcohol or other drugs by the driver or other people inside the vehicle. Requiring all vehicle occupants to wear safety belts at all times. Restricting the number of teenage passengers in the vehicle. And never driving when fatigued, angry, or upset. And finally, we have how to properly use the parent-teen driving agreement. Act promptly if there is an infraction of the agreement. Be firm but gentle. Be consistent when applying consequences for infractions and not negotiating consequences that have already been established in the agreement. Be positive. Focus on the new driver's safety and welfare as a main concern and reward responsible behavior. Parents and the new driver share the same goal, helping the teen become a safe, responsible driver. While it is impossible to completely eliminate risk in driving situations, know that there are ways to reduce it. Always remain vigilant for potentially risky situations and adjust your speed and position as needed.